Please state your name, your branch of service, and your date of service.
Dr. Nicholas Chuff, and I was a member of the U.S. Army Veterinary Corps, and date of service was June of 1977 through June of 1980.
My name is Douglas Hofstra, and we are interviewing you from Bradley Elementary, Perry Junior High at 3:53. How did you get into the military?
Long story made short, I was drafted and I went in as a private, and if I finished first or second in my company of 640, I was allowed to go back to college and get an ROTC, or I could have gone to Officers Candidate School. I finished second in my company of 640. I went back to college, finished my 4 years of college, went to veterinary school, and then went on active duty after I became a veterinarian.
What did you do as a veterinarian?
At first, I was in charge of all the food inspection of Western New York State. I was the officer in charge at Seneca Army Depot in Romulus, New York, and I was also the officer in charge of Fort Drum up in Watertown, New York. When I volunteered for Korea, I was the chief of animal medicine for 8th U.S. Army. I was in charge of the military working dog program for the Far East. And we had 3 veterinary hospitals, 20 technicians, and we took care of all the military working dogs in Korea and the private pets, and I was also the liaison officer to the Korean cavalry.
Were you the veterinarian to any other animals besides the dogs and some of the cavalry?
Well, there were some pets, and we fixed a hawk one time that got shot and had a broken wing, but other than that, pretty much just dogs, cats, pets, or military working dogs.
So were you the vet for all of the dogs, the bomb dogs, and
Yes,
all the
bomb
types of
dogs, narcotics dogs, and sentry dogs. We had 3 different types of dogs.
What did you do for those dogs?
Well, routine preventive maintenance, making sure they have all their vaccinations, that they were fed, they were watered properly, they were taken care of, did dental exams, they all got their teeth cleaned twice a year, because a military working dog without good, sharp, shiny teeth isn't much of an asset. If they had problems with arthritis, which they often did, we'd do x-rays on their hips, and we did routine surgeries for something if they need to have something corrected.
When you were there, did you take any other training for anything special in Vietnam? Korea?
So I was in charge of a field unit, and I had an air-droppable field veterinary hospital, and I would take it out in the field, and I would run it, bringing military working dogs in, and we actually worked on them in the field. So we had a whole unit with trucks, our own generators, our own tents, and we were a self-contained support unit for 8th U.S. Army.
How long were you in the field?
We were in the field for 2 to 3 weeks at a time.
How long were you in Korea?
I was in Korea for 2 years.
What was your primary weapon issued?
M16 and a 45. I had both.
How did you like the M16? Was it to your favorites, or did you dislike it?
So it was accurate. It was a good personal self-defense weapon, but there were other weapons that were more effective for longer range.
What was your most memorable experience?
My most memorable experience? Probably flying in the helicopters with the helicopter pilots all over Korea. They used to fly me to the tax sites to take care of the dogs, but a lot of my friends were pilots and they had to get time in their flights, so we flew all over Korea by helicopter, which was kind of neat, seeing different parts of Korea.
So, was your 4 years of college before you went into tour, was that the only education you got?
So I had 4 years of college and 4 years of veterinary school. I had 8 years of college before I went on active duty. I had no college. I had finished but only 1 semester when I was drafted the first time.
I was wondering, when you went to school, you were looking to be a veterinarian, and then you were, so was that your intention the whole time when you first went to school and then you were drafted?
So I was pre-med, and I did get accepted to medical school and veterinary school,
Okay.
but I took a long walk with my dog and I ended up becoming a veterinarian.
Yeah, nice. And when they drafted you, they knew that that was something that you were, when you were allowed to go back to school, they knew what you wanted to do, and then you were allowed to, like, that's what they used you for? Because sometimes they don't use you for
Right.
what you should be intended for.
Right, so they really didn't know why I went back to school at that point in time. They just told me that I could go back to college, which is what I wanted to do. I had messed up, and that's how I ended up getting drafted in the first place.
Right.
So I went to college to play football and didn't go to classes very often.
Uh-huh.
So I got drafted.
How'd you keep in touch with home?
Either, well, telephone, letters. Wasn't much internet at that point in time.
Wasn't around for me.
What were the rations like? Was the food okay when you were in Korea?
The food in the mess hall was just like you would get here. Or like a college campus, very similar. When you're in the field, we had rations, MRIs, they called them meals ready to eat, and you'd have different types of selections inside of them. But they were basically nutrition, they weren't all that tasty.
How did you feel about your military experiences?
I felt like it was an honor to serve my country. My family had served before me, and it was kind of nice that I was able to do that.
I know that you said you tended to the military animals. Now, you said they had bomb dogs and they had narcotic dogs? I
So,
wouldn't have thought about that. Like, what were the purposes? I mean, how many dogs or animals, military animals, did they have in service? I guess what I was thinking, I didn't really think of animals in service during the conflicts and wars. I didn't really think of that.
so I had approximately 800 dogs, military working dogs. Sentry dogs were designed to protect an area. Okay, they were at the base of the tactical sites where the radar could not read, and they would run loose inside those fences and they would protect an area. They couldn't be used among the general populace. The patrol dogs could be. These dogs could be worked on leash among people without any risk to the people unless their handler wanted there to be a risk. And they were cross-trained in either narcotics or in explosives, not both.
Okay. So they had to have a particular nose for one or the other?
Well,
Is that why?
no, it's just that that's the way they were trained. The bomb dogs, we used little Cairn Terriers that would run up and down the luggage racks of the plane because it was much easier for them to search a plane than a big German Shepherd.
Oh.
Yep, so we had, and we gave them a little rubber ball and that was their reward for finding something.
Did you help train them, or did
Yes,
you?
I helped train them also.
You did?
Yes.
Did you do any of that after you went, after you left the service? Did you do
Nope.
any?
Nope, just while I was in there.
Wow. You said there are difference, sorry Doug, I'll let you continue it. There's a difference between you said the sentry dogs and the,
Patrol dogs.
thank you, that was the
Right.
word. Now the sentry dogs were just taught to attack anything that came, is that what it was? Because they were doing a perimeter?
Attack and hold
Okay.
until their handler came and released them.
Okay. Wow. I didn't really think about that. I mean, in pictures, in other wars and stuff, I had seen dogs, but I never
We've
really
always had sentry
considered them.
dogs.
You know, think about
And
it.
they had tracker dogs in Vietnam, which were a little bit different, and tunnel dogs that would actually go down in the tunnels. But we didn't have those in Korea.
Yeah. Wow.
How did your military experience change or influence your life?
So one thing, since I was in charge of a unit and I had $1 million budget and I had no business experience, I was forced to go back to college to the University of Maryland Far East Division and take accounting and bookkeeping courses, and that's helped me with the business for the rest of my life. So I run my own business now.
Were you ever in combat?
No. However, my friends and I did take a little side trip into North Korea just to see what was going on. So my helicopter pilot friends had to get extra time, like I mentioned before, and they'd fly the picket fence, as they called it, routinely, just to do it. So
Fly the picket fence.
fly the picket fence.
Do you remember that?
Did you learn anything special in Vietnam that you use
No,
currently?
Korea. Keep
Did you
going.
learn anything special in Korea that you use today now?
So I had the best medical equipment available at the time. I had the most highly trained technicians available at the time. I had the ability to watch human surgeons work on people and have them help me with my military working dogs, because my dogs were worth approximately $10,000 a piece by the time they got all the training and everything into them. So if something was wrong with one of my dogs, I couldn't send it back to the United States. So if a surgery was beyond my level of expertise, one of the human surgeons would join me on the surgery and help me. And I was, like I said, I was able to help them on surgeries, and it really improved my surgical skills also. I was able to sit side by side with a pathologist looking at tumors and other type of tissues on a two-headed microscope, which was very useful in training me. So I used a lot of my time to increase my veterinary education while I was in Korea.
When you came back, did you put that to use as well?
Yes.
What was, while you were there, what was the most unusual situation involving an animal that you had? Or challenging, I guess I would say.
More challenging was a disease condition called gastric torsions, where their stomach would actually twist, and it was a life-threatening situation. And I was able to find out the cause of it was that they were feeding the dogs and then exercising them. So we changed it so that they weren't exercised after they were fed, and the problem went away. But I had to operate on quite a few of them before we found out what the problem was.
Did you ever lose a dog?
Certainly.
Was that I would imagine, especially if you've trained them and then had to lose them, that must have been quite challenging.
So when a dog came into my hospital, their handler became part of my unit and under my supervision. So until I released the dog, the handler was part of my unit. And then when I released the dog, I released the handler.
The handlers must become very attached as well as, how do you not become attached to these animals when you are working with them that closely? I can imagine you must when you do, and the handler is, it's like family.
And lots of times that dog saved his life.
Absolutely.
So there was a very strong bond between them. And then when they left the country and they couldn't take their dog with them, I'd be responsible for transferring that loyalty to another soldier. Very difficult task.
That would be, how does one do that? Change the loyalty?
Very carefully and over time.
And over time.
And that's all I can really tell you.
Yeah. How long was the training for the dogs? How long did
In San Antonio, where they were trained at Lackland Air Force Base, they were trained for 2 to 3 months. And all our dogs were procured in the United States, and they all went through the Lackland Air Force Base training program before they were sent over to Korea.
Yeah, just as much. They have a lot of training, just like people, you know.
Did you receive any awards or medals?
I received the Meritorious Service Medal for developing and utilizing the only air-droppable field veterinary hospital in the world.
For doing the what? Say that?
For developing the only air-droppable field veterinary hospital in the world.
What's that mean?
You could drop it out of an airplane and run it.
Really?
Drop to a parachutes.
It's fantastic.
So you actually developed this method.
I actually developed it. The one that they had previously had glass bottles in it, which really wasn't smart and it really wouldn't function. And so what we do is we drive some of our equipment out to the site, but the majority of it will be dropped from an airplane. And then we became part of a combat unit. We were the service support for the combat unit.
What inspired that? What inspired you to come up with that?
My commanding officer asked me to do it. So it was done. Yes. And then he went back to the Pentagon and he wrote it up when he went back stateside.
Do you have what did you do in your downtime?
What
when you were there?
Martial arts.
And so that's what you spent your time doing?
So my commanding officer gave me a choice. Either I could get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do PT with the rest of the troops, or I could do the martial arts. And he wanted me to do the martial arts because he wanted me to inspire my troops not to go down to the village and spend their money doing things they shouldn't be doing, and to train in the martial arts. So that was the majority of what I spent my time doing. Plus, a personal friend of mine was a Korean Special Forces veterinarian, And I spent a lot of time with him out on the economy, just visiting and doing things with our unit.
Did your unit also do more martial arts? Were you able to inspire them, or did they want to go?
Yes, I had quite a few people that did martial arts, but yes, we had a lot of young
Oh,
troops.
they're young.
They got in trouble, and I was responsible for giving them Article 15s when they messed up, so I tried to keep them out of trouble as much as I could.
Yeah. We all do that with everybody. Yeah, there you go.
Not
We
always
do so
successfully,
much. No.
but we tried.
That's right, we tried, but we're not out.
Do you guys know what Article 15 is? It's non-judicial punishment. In other words, I say, this is what happens to you, and that's what happens to you. You don't get to go to a court, you don't get to go to a judge. I'm the judge and jury, so.
What kinds of punishments would they get?
Take away pay, take away leave,
Okay. Depending on what they do.
extra duty.
Extra duty.
Yep. Depends on the severity of the offense.
And how was your relationship with your unit?
I think it was very good. I tried to be very fair with them, but they knew it was black and white. There was no gray. So they knew if they crossed the line that we'd have to have problems. But that's the way it has to be in a military unit. There can't be a lot of gray areas.
It's a very different place from, I think of it in regards to any kind of enforcement agency, military or law enforcement or anything like that. It is black or white. It has to be in order to keep order and to keep everything running the way it needs to be.
Very strict interpretation of the regulations.
Would you do it again?
Certainly. I'd go now.
You would? How long did you stay in?
Just for 3 years total. But actually, my time in service extended from when I actually went in the first time, so I was a captain with over 7 years' time in service for pay grade.
What styles of martial arts did you learn?
So over in Korea, it was called Tang, and so it was the predecessor of Taekwondo that we see here today.
Okay. If you think about like the way that Taekwondo was pretty popular in the United States, would you recommend that everybody learned it there first?
So in Korea, everyone has to learn. It's their national sport, and also everyone has to go in the military. There are no options. So they're taught the martial arts while they're in the military. So I think it'd be good for everybody to learn how to defend themselves. I think it's and not just to defend themselves, but awareness, so they can avoid situations. Awareness is every bit as important as being able to defend yourself.
By awareness, you mean?
Be aware of your surroundings and realize that you can't relinquish your responsibility for yourself to somebody else. In other words, you can't trust somebody to watch out for you. You have to watch out for yourself. Everybody. You can't assume that your husband or your friend is watching your back. You have to watch your own back. That's your responsibility. It's a personal responsibility.
And you would recommend the military to people?
I certainly would. I mean, I think it's changed quite a bit from when I was in it, but I think that everybody should have the chance to experience it, and I think that it has some really positive upsides.
Where did you grow up?
Frankfurt.
Frankfurt? So you're locally born?
I grew up on a dairy farm in Frankfurt.
How did your family feel about you joining the military at the time?
They were a little apprehensive, but my father had been in General Eisenhower's office in Washington, D.C., so he certainly understood why I did what I did. So, and my uncle was also in the European theater during World War II.
Yeah. Did you, and I think that with that kind of background, it definitely inspires patriotic feeling too. Some kids don't necessarily, or people don't necessarily have that feeling, but when you have a personal connection to it, that's been carried on.
Right, we only have the freedoms we have today because other people are making sure that we have them.
Exactly. Any other questions?
You got any more questions?
I keep taking. Well, I don't know that we asked you about the type of training
ask about the type of training.
So which type in particular are you interested in? Before I became a veterinarian or after I became a
Yeah,
veterinarian?
before you became a veterinarian, what did you do to train for being drafted into the military?
Okay, so once I was drafted, I went through basic training like everybody else did. So physical training is certainly part of it. Hand combat is part of it. Okay, map reading, orienteering, which means getting from one place to another. Explosives, demolition. Okay, because I wasn't a veterinarian at that point in time. Communications, artillery. So we were taught in all aspects of the military. Tactics.
How did you start out as an officer? You said you started out as a...
So when I went back to college, after going through basic training, I went to Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC. And when I graduated from college, I was commissioned a second lieutenant for one day. They gave me an honorable discharge for all the time that I was in veterinary school. And then they recommissioned me as a captain when I graduated from veterinary school.
Do you have any memorable stories you would like to share?
Not that I'd like to share. Maybe someday, guys.
Yeah. Was there, I remember speaking, I don't know if it was, no, Vietnam, you had a lot of problems with drugs. I think we talked about that with one of them. Was there anything that made life difficult for the troops over in Korea? Like, what was the hardest thing for
Being
them?
away from home. A lot of them were young, and it's the first time they were ever away from their parents, and they were easily influenced by bad behavior by other troops, or drugs, or alcohol, or prostitution. All these things were things that the kids got up involved in. They married Korean women who were involved in the black market, and so they'd buy things from the PX, and they'd end up being on the black market, and then they'd have to be punished for it. Some of them came home one night, and there was nothing there. The whole apartment, everything was gone. And they were responsible for it because they had purchased it. It had to leave country with them. They no longer had it. They were in trouble.
So the women took advantage of them? Is that what
Definitely.
happened?
Oh, definitely.
So they married these women, and then the women took advantage of them and sold their stuff. So then what did they do? Did the women disappear?
Mhm. Unless I could find them.
All right, I'm trying to think if there's anything. I was thinking more about too, that they would get involved. Did the local economy cater to the troops then? You know,
Oh,
with
yes.
those things, you know,
Oh,
the drugs,
definitely.
the alcohol, they made everything available to
Definitely. It
them.
was a place called Itaewon, where the troops went. It was very close to the base. But we determined if a place was off limits or not, and if they got caught in a place that was off limits, they'd be in severe trouble.
Okay, so everybody was aware that.
Right, so there
you
were
know,
places
these were
that were
things.
known bad places. We kept them away from them. We tried to.
We tried to, but there's still big people out on leave.
Right, and it would just be another place the next week, and another place the next week.
Right, yeah. Oh. What kinds of punishments could they get for those? Like, if somebody did get married to a Korean woman and all that disappeared, what would happen to them?
So it depended on how severe it was and the volume of stuff that they were. If they had been warned and they continually did that, then they might get a court-martial and actually be drummed out of the military.
Oh,
It could have been that serious.
okay. Wow.
Why were they responsible for things that they bought in the country?
Because they bought them at the post exchange on the base. And if you bought something, see, the whole idea is we were a guest of the Korean government. And for us to do something to their economy was not allowed. And by us selling American goods at a cheaper rate than what actually would cost on the economy, well, that was against their law too.
That's what it means by the black market. You're selling it where it's not allowed.
And for a cheaper price.
At a
Because
cheaper
you could buy the same thing in Korea that you could buy in any store here for the same price. That was an advantage that we gave the people that were in Korea. We tried to keep things as much like home as possible. But for them to take that and to sell it to a Korean was illegal. For them to use, to take American money and sell it to Koreans was illegal.
They would sell American money?
They'd get 20-30% more. They sell it at a premium. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was illegal.
Are you all good?
Burned?
Can't think of any questions.
Well, I don't know. This is the first, I think what's very interesting to me is I had never considered, you know, you think about them needing doctors, but you forget about the fact that they need doctors for animals too. Like, I did not think about that as being something. I think it's interesting to me to know the wide scale of operations that has to happen when you go to war. It's not just, you know, this one small thing. There's a huge amount of things that go on.
There's combat and there's combat service support. So, which are hospitals and supply and everything else that goes with it.
And we had, we interviewed a man in our first year who was who had been in the Korean War, and he had no military or no medical experience, but he was doing medical things, like that's what he got trained to do while he was there. And he said that's really what I was doing, is trying to save lives. I don't remember what they called them.
Medics.
Thank you. That's what he was. So, but
So one other thing you mentioned before, but what my most memorable experience was with an animal. My most memorable experience overall was when President Park was assassinated, and I saw the machinery rolling down through the streets, the tanks and everything else was going on, and it was a very, very tense time for the American military there when he was assassinated, because the government was in anarchy. So, very, very difficult time.
must have been very stressful.
And at that point in time, my wife, who was my fiance at that time, was with me, and so I had things all set up with my helicopter buddies to get her to Japan. I told her to carry her passport and her jewelry with her wherever she went, because if I said she was gone, she was gone.
Right.
So it was a very tense time for about 2 to 3 weeks.
Really? And where did you meet your wife?
She was a Department of Defense school teacher. Yep, she was teaching first grade.
Wow. So that's where you met her? You met her over there?
Yep.
And then did you get married there or here?
Nope, when we came back here.
When you
When I went back into veterinary practice in upstate New York.
Where were you a veterinarian in upstate New York?
Just south of Watertown, Adams, New York.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. I
Familiar.
went back into practice with a classmate of mine before I started my own practice.
Good for you. That's fantastic. This is such an interesting thing, because I knew nothing about this at all. And I know very little. I'm not the history person, I'm the English person. Caroline does the history stuff, so I get very interested in this because I know nothing about any of these things.
That's good.
This is more and more my, this is how I learn, I guess, is through these.
Any other questions?
I can't think of any.
Is there anything more that you would like to add? Anything that you can think of that you would like to share?
No, I think that's pretty much got it.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I appreciate it. Are you all set, hon?
Yeah.
Okay.